Ronald Kenneth Strasser, judicial, executive, and legislative corruption and official misconduct by bar members of the first degree. My experience with the judicial corruption and the official misconduct with bar members being the ones that run the court system and the administrations of government, have fed from my life that I know of from the age of 16. They've done so successfully with the help of the educational system here within Oregon State, the de jure. And the effect of dumbing us all down. Did I have any sort of legal training, knowledge, or understanding that once I received, once I became a teenager or a young adult, that I was susceptible as a preyed upon animal is in the wild by these members of the bar that run the judicial branch. And I think today we could safely say that they probably run the executive and legislative branch as well. And I don't know if it was intended that way many, many years ago, but I think that's the way it is today. Without this, this educational process that I went through, and the dumbing down process, I mean, I had no idea, and it became apparent to me as a young man early on that things weren't adding up. I learned as a boy, I think, that if I did something against the order or the will of my parents, that I would be corrected or scolded for that, and there was generally a reason for not doing something I was told not to do. As a young man, I was told that I was a criminal, and was my reputation, my name, my character was damaged as such from these lies and slanderous remarks, unfounded as they are yet today. So what a terrible thing for somebody like myself, as it was, to feel this guilt and shame placed upon my conscience by these attorneys who are wordsmiths and very clever in their levels of sincerity to have people like myself believe that they are always working in my best interest for what is best for me, which from my own experience I have learned is the opposite of the actual truth. They care not for me, and in fact, as a young man with one court-appointed attorney on a traffic matter from Clackamas County, Oregon City, Oregon, bluntly was told by this man, whose name was Mark Beard, young member of the bar, that he was told by his supervisor within the office to make a harsh example of me. And he didn't do it. He didn't do it. And in fact, fought for rights I didn't even understood I had at that time, but to a favorable outcome. But in so doing, cost him his bar membership and put me in a standing with these attorneys in their administrative capacity with a permanent brand. And to this day, at the age of 53, I am still totally controlled by the Oregon Bar in its court process, with charges pending at this time for possession and, as they call it, sales of marijuana for consideration. These charges, and now backtracking, stem from more than a 3-year battle with the attorneys of 2 separate counties in a probate case for a family farm, home, legacy, heritage, and my personal inheritance given to me by my mother and her will and testament. As I said, that battle was for more than 3 years. In that battle of more than 3 years, it seemed, even after having 2 barns, 1 shop, horse corral, hand-dug well, all personal property, including 4 horses, removed and stolen from me, that I was going to prevail, winning, reclaiming possession of this land. When, through an entrapment, through an episode of entrapment with an acquaintance to a friend, I was lured in to provide this man with his cannabis sativa that he used to medicate, as he told me, a habit and an addiction to methamphetamine. And that he particularly liked the kind of weed that I was using myself at that time, not having smoked it for more than 8 years, to medicate my own oppression due to the demolition and destruction and confiscation of this family, home, farm, heritage, inheritance, and legacy. Been in a piece of ground that had been in my family since 1947, where my mother was brought up and raised, where I was born and raised, to take me out of the fight. This incorporates a multimillionaire neighbor, James Fisher, a long time and good standing relationship with a man whose name is Ken Summers, was captain of the guard at Yamhill County until his recent retirement, and the prize of what could possibly be more than $300,000 paid to various attorneys and other pockets that were involved in bringing me down and ultimately stealing this family farm and inheritance. Mind you, there was never a mortgage or a delinquent tax on this ground. It had been paid for in 1947 with cash and was never mortgaged, and there was never a delinquent tax on the place either. So those elements had nothing to do with this confiscation. As I was told by one, and I've heard this story told by others, that the land was more valuable with somebody like me not on the land or in possession and control of that land. So, hard thing to hear though for someone that's like myself, you know, being born and raised there, and every great and fond memory he'd ever had, you know, coming from that home. So, I said maybe one of the greatest things is education. I learned reading from a book, Coming of Age in America, that through the educational indoctrination system, that you know, I was primed to be ignorant and dumb, and with no knowledge of the Bar Association and how it operates in its judicial, let alone executive or legislative branches of Congress and the Oregon government here, the House and the Senate. And as I later learned, through forced learning, if I was going to understand how this tyranny and oppression keeps repressing me, I had to learn. And in so doing, I find that these people operate from a position of no delegation of authority. In fact, I guess what I'm trying to say is that they operate from a de facto seat and not the de jure, and not here to, they're de facto and the de jure. Common law and public policy and unlicensed corporate activity, etc. I don't want to get too lost here in in the point of sharing this. But it's just, I'm 53. This began at the age of 16. It's not over today. It may never over. I could be one of those that dies with lots of other brothers and sisters dying today and have died before me in these prisons or dungeons of man, used to repress people like myself. I feel really small and inconsequential. I mean, but yet my life is important, and how I think, act, and feel is also important, and the injuries and suffering and pain that I've lived through is also important, and some of the joy and pleasantries of life are important. But with so much fraud and so much corruption, that I hear so many people acting and speaking as though it needs to be the way it is in order to keep the rest of us in control. Well, I disagree. I totally and completely disagree, because I've lived with this brand and this idea that I'm a troublemaker. Well, in getting more familiar with language and things like dictionaries, I find that I'm not the trouble at all. That trouble comes from the agencies of government, and that I needed to watch out for them, and still do to this day, because they act with immunity and impunity, meaning there's no accountability for their bad acts of bad faith, unclean hands, with deceptive practices. You don't have to be a master graduate of some topic to be a fair, moral, and principled man. My basic learning of right and wrong and hospitality came from a couple of great-grandparents whom I admire greatly, and who left me the legacy with the land on that farm that had been in my family since '47, which today is possessed by a tyrant who's been greasing the palms in Yamhill County for more than 25 years. Why is he allowed to enjoy my home and my family? And why, I was made homeless in that event, and everything I had, including 4 horses, stole from me. Yes, I got the 4 horses back, and some of my stuff that was there on the family homestead, but 80% of it, including the land, I lost. Personal and private property and building and farm supplies. Just outright plundering, thievery, pillaging. Is it history repeating itself again and again? Maybe it is. But I think before it can come to I think before some magnitude of change will come about, is that the bar, in this case where I live here in Oregon, it would be the Oregon bar, has to be held accountable for its acts and its behavior. One of the attorneys involved in ex parte hearings in a probate case, signing documents that were outside of probate code, is today up on ethics violations. Not for that matter as of yet, but in other matters where he was caught croning with his fellow members of the bar in their administrative court business. So, you know, I'm one of hundreds of thousands today who are having their homes stolen through hook and crook, through spin, through shysterism. You know, we're given notice, I'm learning, in language and words. You know, if you define the word shyster, you come up with a deceptive practitioner. If you define the word attorney, you come up with someone that's turning. He's spinning, she's turning. They're taking away and giving to someone else. You know, if you look up in America's jurisprudence, you find out that the last one of any importance in any matter at all is the claim. So to give a quick short summary, on the most recent episode, which has lasted now, well, 13 years. So I'll give you the episode, I'll give you a quick summary on the episode from March 2nd, 2004. I learned to challenge what is known as subject matter jurisdiction in these tribunals. Tribunal being the court. And everybody says the court this and the court that. Well, the court does nothing on itself. It's those speaking and acting within those courts that do everything. But the court is a tribunal. So from March 2nd, 2004, I go to prison from a trial held in absentia on charges they called felonies for assault of who they called a safety officer, whom when he was attacking me was a law enforcement officer. But when he was attacking me without authority and jurisdiction. His allegation and accusation was that he was in possession of a misdemeanor warrant for failure to appear on a violation. When I challenged him on the possession of that warrant, he said that he didn't have it, but that it was in the station house, the guardhouse of the Yamhill County Sheriff's Department. So after being maced and beaten up and arrested, whereby I was non-combatant, as clean and sober as I am before this, in this interview today, I get charged with assault of a safety officer × 2. Well, there was never 2 officers or cops there was only ever 1. And this particular officer whom they claim, they claim officers, the 2 that it was claimed were assaulted, were never seen by a doctor, never missed a day of work. And in fact, it was later learned that one of them wasn't even a cop and had been retired for more than 8 years. Had no business being involved in that matter whatsoever. After dispatch refused to send backup on the incident. So from a trial that was held in absentia, because I couldn't participate after learning that they were not going to protect my rights, as I understand them to be. The right to the dictates of my conscience, religious beliefs, and unlimited contract. Being responsible for all my actions, thought, word, and deed. I was inundated and surrounded by bar members who are unaccountable, completely unaccountable. So I knew that there was no way, and after testing and challenging what is known as subject matter jurisdiction, that I was not going to get a fair trial. In fact, I had went through 7 different judges, them bringing judges from out of the county in. And the last one they brought in from out of the county, a man whose name is Fred Avera, still a member of the Oregon Bar today, and has a judgeship in Polk County, Dallas, Oregon. The morning they had scheduled to have this trial, I served and filed with summons a complaint on the judge and the prosecutor, establishing clearly on the record a conflict of interest. By all their trial court rules and proceedings, that case should have been put back in the basket and reappointed, reassigned, and it wasn't. They went ahead and without me had a trial. They call it trial in absentia. There's no validation or authority in any of the Oregon Revised Statutes or the Oregon Constitution or any other code, rule, or regulation or law that they want to use to justify it. It just doesn't exist. I said a pretty profound and pretty revealing statement at allocution. It went unignored. The appeal went on for more than 5 years. Not only was I sent to prison, but I was sent to prisons for 4 times more the maximum sentence. Served every day of it. While this was going on, there was some harassment of my mother to sell the family farm to this rich multimillionaire to the east who'd been greasing in the palms of Yamhill County for some time. She refused his last offer, 2006, of just about $500,000. When she refused that officer, within 2 weeks, the house was set fire, mysteriously set fire. Fire department was on the scene within 5 minutes, we'd only being a mile and a half from town, but waited more than 25 minutes to put the first drop of water on it. The claim was that a power line still attached to the pole more than 60 yards from the burning house needed to be taken down by the power company before they could dispense with water. And then some things going on in between then and my release of June 9th, 2008. But just 28 days before my release, my mother was finally killed by the doctors of Tuolumne Park Hospital. To this day, I've been denied those hospital records of my mother's care there so that I could properly read the diagnosis and the prognosis. So with just more of the facts as I know them and have experienced them, I believe my mother was murdered. I've got lots of experience to tell me this, and the fact that they want to hide and refuse to give me these records without more summons and court process says a lot. So I go to prison, mom gets killed, 28 days before my release. I find my testate case is now in probate. I have a disgruntled half-sister, and she's taking real advantage of the bad situation that I'm in. And long and short, 3 years of a battle in probate. It's still not over. I'm labeled a squatter by all documentation in this probate proceeding as a squatter. I'm labeled as a squatter. My mother's firstborn son, my great-grandfather's first great-grandson, the only valid male heir to the inheritance, with a will that said I was supposed to spend the rest of my life on this farm and share it with my sister, who was from Delaware, lived in Delaware to this day. I end up homeless with no farm, no family estate, no personal belongings, and no financial reward from my mother's 50 years of working. She had more than $100,000 in funds with annuities and accounts, etc., all of which was pilfered by, well, all but I received $28,000 of that, so the rest of it, and the records I've not seen, but the rest of that was all pilfered by the sister and the attorney and a few others, as well as the sale of the farm. To now where I have these pending charges, I think, as I said earlier in this interview, for marijuana, which stemmed from somebody that was in my path, who had crossed my path, who conveniently was in my path. He was a neighbor at that, and a friend of a neighbor, so an acquaintance to me through a neighbor. But he was put to the task of entrapping me with sales of marijuana. Well, that's an interesting charge in itself, so-called crime, that many of you may not agree or disagree. But as it's charged, as I am charged with this so-called crime of possessing and sales for consideration of marijuana, I ask and I look for the injured party there. The one that can bring a verified complaint of injury or harm caused by me, whereby it was my intent to cause injury or harm, which is my only definition of the word crime. Well, it's called, it's actually an offense, a crime of offense against a code that regulates. And maybe I don't know what I don't know, which, well, not maybe, I don't know. I know that I don't know what I don't know. But if I'm not mistaken, then in a possession of marijuana, or as they say, a sales of marijuana to somebody that wants it, where is the injury and where is the harm? And why is the charge, the face of the charge, say the state of this state of Oregon, this state. You see what I've learned in learning that I don't know what I don't know, that grammar, language, and English are probably one of the two most subjects that I could have learned. So my challenge today with the attorneys in their court process is where's the verified complaint from the injured party? And if it is indeed the state of Oregon, and it can't be the de jure state they're talking about, but hypothetically, let's say it is the de jure state that they're talking about, then there should be some people in that courtroom or tribunal from the de jure state who are there as an injury caused by me for me possessing the herb that is called marijuana and sharing it with the neighbor that was actually planted upon me to bring me down so they could end this fight that I wasn't giving up in the probate. Had I not been entrapped with this marijuana, I believe that I had finally come across a process that was going to take total control and possession of this 5-acre farm. I believe through things that were happening prior to this bust, through emails and the cell phone device that I was using, that people were monitoring my activity. It only explains the things that were mysteriously happening before they were things were going on, undermining what it was I was doing. The bust itself. So ignorance has been one of my biggest enemies. My illiteracy has been one of my biggest enemies. So for my own grown children and grandchildren I may have, or great-grandchildren that may come in my posterity, the greatest thing that I feel will happen to any of them is the same thing that happened to me. And it's the dumbing down, the ignorance, the loss of the valid information about the meaning of liberty and freedom. At least as I have learned it, and as I now know, that when I swore my first oath as a young enrollee to the Army to protect this country from invasion, foreign and within, that I really knew nothing about my rights and what that meant. But coming from somewhat of a military background, with the men in my family. I had that essence to fight for what was right and protect the land of the home we live from, that grows the food that I eat, that keeps me nourished. Yeah, I want to protect that. But did I have a clue? And should I don't think that that oath should have been given to me until I fully understood at least the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. And as I now know in reading the Oregon Revised Statutes, in a particular section of the code in the 3 numbers, that I was to be given a minimum of 6 years of legal training before graduating high school. It says it right there in the code. Well, that would have made it pretty hard for the attorneys of the Oregon Bar and all their administrative court process and the other 2 branches of government to have destroyed my life had I understood where their jurisdiction lied and where it ended, and how to protect myself. I was a young man, 23 years of age, married to his high school sweetheart with 2 children and 1 on the way, and a family business, and a wife working outside the house, when I became prey and fell prey to, due to my ignorance, to the bar, and was sent to prison for something I should have never been sent to prison for. I've seen the most egregious acts by these attorneys in their court process that I can ever imagine, and nothing is surprising to me today. I mean, I have heard, there's no shock in the stories that I hear today or will hear tomorrow. The nature of man and what he will do to protect his position of power and control. It's endless, and it makes me feel pretty naive even to talk in this manner of it. It seems like it should be obvious that the nature of man is going to be ugly, but it can't be, because so many of the masses just seem to want to do what's right and will do what's right and just want the opportunity to do what's right, and we've just got so much fraud and swindle going on around us that it's just so hard for many of us to think that it can ever be any differently. But for men that make this opportunity to me possible, and for those that have died before me and will die after me, and for all those that filled the dungeon cells, not just in Oregon State, but in Idaho, California, Missouri, Maine, New Hampshire, I sit here for them. Great men and great women die every day in these dungeons for doing nothing more than to try to bring to you people out here the truth in the level of corruption within each city, state, and county government. What do I do? What's left for me? They've taken everything I've ever valued, everything I ever believed in, and they told me it means nothing. So, I too question today the value and the importance or significance of my being here. So, oftentimes, many times, I feel like a coward that I didn't die over the looting and pillaging and plundering of my inheritance, my legacy, my family, my home, everything my mother believed in and worshipped and fought for. That makes me feel somewhat shameful that I didn't do more to actually stand up and fight the people that were doing this looting and plundering. But I was domesticated, if you will. I don't know what I don't know, and I can ramble and rattle on forever. So I just hope that You know, I hope that you're able to depict some value and some significance and some reason for yourself to stand up for the misjustice, the injustice that you know has affected your own life and goes on within your own community. And I guess as it just comes to mind, the thing that brought me here today was this. And I read this from, I think, under a picture of Marshall Thorogood, who if I'm not mistaken, was a Supreme Court justice. And he told me that the only thing I have to do to allow evil in man to triumph is to do nothing. So I can't tell you that I'm any kind of a man of any kind of moral or any kind of value if I'm not willing to stand up to evil. I stand up to tyranny. I stand up to oppression. I stand up to repression. I learned that it's just as easy to live my life being accountable for my thought, words, and deed as it was to not. And because I've learned that valuable lesson, I can lay my head each night without regret that I've harmed no man, woman, or child. So let's call for accountability, and let's not just call for it, let's demand it, and let's expect it. It's expected of you, and you expect it of yourself, and you expect it of those you love and care for. So let's start being responsible, and let's start doing a little more self-governing. It's defined in the two words, self-determination, very clearly. Let's start teaching our young. Let's teach our young that we can speak for ourselves. And we can't be accountable for ourselves unless we can act and think for ourselves. We don't need attorneys running and controlling our lives. Think about it. They offer nothing. They produce nothing but havoc and chaos. They manage through crises that they create for their own means, through their own purposes, for their own end. Thank you.